Get back to some of this in a short while, but this war with China, meanwhile, looks like getting worse. Now, China's communist regime really seems determined to punish us for daring to call for an independent inquiry into how this virus started. I mean, we know it started in China, but how, where, precisely? And we need to know the answers because it's now killed 100 of us and devastated our economy. But to shut us up, China first banned beef exports from 4 big abattoirs. This week, it killed our barley exports, worth $600 million. And now Bloomberg Media quotes unnamed sources saying Chinese officials have a list of other Australian exports they may now ban, including seafood, oatmeal and fruit. And Bloomberg says its sources warn that Chinese state media could also start encouraging consumer boycotts of our other exports, which fits in with the threat by China's ambassador a few weeks ago, that if we didn't shut up about this inquiry, then maybe the ordinary Chinese people will say, why should we drink Australian wine, eat Australian beef? Well, the Chinese have got rid of that option. They've stopped those beef exports. Well, Trade Minister Simon Birmingham today said these reports of a new hit list were unsourced and they were for China to answer. But he did point out that China and Australia had a mutual interest in keeping trade going, please. But in Beijing, the spokesman of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs sounded like nothing short of an Australian surrender would do.
I want to stress that we welcome it if Australia changes its course, completely gives up its political manoeuvre and returns to the broad consensus of the international community following the relevant WHA resolution.
What a bunch of thugs now run China. Great civilisation, don't get me wrong. Love some of the poetry from the Tang Dynasty, if I want to sound like a real wanker. Great civilisation, but now in the hands of thugs and gangsters. And to discuss this, I was joined a short while ago by Sky News political editor Andrew CLENNELL. Andrew CLENNELL, thank you so much for joining us. This Bloomberg report doesn't name its sources, doesn't even say whether they're Chinese or Australian, but how seriously is the government taking it?
Well, not that seriously, but I guess we're going to jump at these sort of things in the current environment. The Chinese ambassador's been pretty strong in his language and really threats a couple of times. Likewise, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman overnight. So the thought of more sanctions coming on board is in the government's mind, and certainly that warning from the Chinese ambassador around we could tell our people to stop consuming your products is a real concern for the Australian government. But Simon Birmingham, the Trade Minister, he made it clear to me today that the Bloomberg report was so unsourced you couldn't really take it seriously, and that we were about a mutual benefit relationship with China around trade, and we hope that was honoured and continued.
Now, obviously China is on the attack here. The words from the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman were not comforting at all. What's the government's game plan from here on? I mean, I thought that resolution from the World Health Assembly for an inquiry watered down what we wanted, but I don't think the government wants to push this too hard. What do you think its strategy will be?
Well, I think our strategy is to shut up and hope for the best, Andrew, to be quite frank about it. I think the feeling is the Australian government got pretty much what it wanted. It didn't get everything it wanted. It's an inquiry by the World Health Organisation, which has its own limitations, particularly because there's evidence they could have tackled it a lot more seriously. Donald Trump certainly thinks so. And it won't occur for some time now until the pandemic crisis is over. So I guess Scott Morrison said it's about the next pandemic and preventing that, but it's still something of a victory for the Australian government, one of the reasons they're getting lashed by China. So they've got what they wanted to some extent. The Australian government, they want to stay under the radar now, talk about mutual benefit and respect and the economic partnership between the two countries. Let China have a little lash at us if they want, and just sort of turn the other cheek and keep trade going. I think that's what the Australian government's thinking at the moment.
Well, meanwhile, of course, I think they're also busy quietly looking for other sources of supplies and other markets to be, I mean, for us to be so dependent on China, 1/4 of our trade is with China, just one country, and so unpredictable. As I noticed the Prime Minister is going to have a virtual summit in 2 weeks with India's Prime Minister to discuss improving trade there, securing more of our supply lines, and diversifying our export markets. Do you see this in some way a response to what we've just gone through with China?
Sure, all of it is, and the Australian government's obviously looking at all of that, and you know, even with barley, it's looking to markets like Thailand and Vietnam. But I mean, you've hit the nail on the head with the problem here, Andrew, and that is that we are so dependent on China, about 1/3 of our exports, or close to 1/3, and so you know, when it comes to diversifying, it's a long process. It's not something that can occur overnight. You're looking at countries with say a 6% share or under 10% share like India, and trying to build things up there. Look, one area that China won't be stopping in terms of a very important export from us is iron ore, and that relationship will continue no matter what, because it's on need in terms of China's position. But what you were saying just then reminds me a bit about what the government's been saying behind the scenes about the universities. They've been saying they're too reliant on international students, and that's why they're suffering now. A lot of those international students are Chinese, but in a way you could take that comparison and use it across the whole economy, and it's a wake-up call for Australia. Scott Morrison's spoken about how a lot of things are going to have to change in our economy after this, including on manufacturing, and certainly our relationship with China will change, and we'll have to do a lot to make sure there are other markets we can access, while at the same time hoping there's enough trade with China to keep us going.
Just finally, Andrew, I noticed that responding to all this over the last couple of days has been the Trade Minister, Simon Birmingham. The Prime Minister has not been out there publicly commenting. Is that a deliberate attempt to try to keep the temperature down?
Oh, certainly. I mean, the Chinese president, I guess, only spoke at the World Health Assembly, but he did. But Scott Morrison would obviously take any questions on these topics and answer them diplomatically at press conferences. But he just so happens he hasn't held a press conference recently, so I think it's more about that. He'd never come out specifically on this. That could only inflame matters. But the comments I've seen him make about China in press conferences, very diplomatic indeed. He's made clear he wants to support Australia's national interest, and that involves this investigation. But at the same time, he's talking about mutual benefit and respect with the Chinese, the economic partnership with the Chinese. He's not seeking to disrespect the Chinese. He's certainly not making the inflammatory comments against the government that their government is making against ours, that's for sure.
Absolutely. I think he's straddled the difficulties here quite well, but boy, I don't think it's one that is easy to win, this one, not with China in this mood. Thank you so much indeed for your time, Andrew CLENNELL.